You're watching BCTV, Branford's community access station.
This is BCTV, Branford Government Television, a service of Branford Community Television. The following program is brought to you through the support of the Town of Branford.
Okay, we are going to call to order the January 24th meeting of the Plan of Conservation and Development. We have can I have a motion to accept the minutes from our last meeting?
Motion to accept. Second.
Any discussion on the minutes? Any additions? No? Okay, I'd like to, we're gonna, for a quick overview of our meeting format, I'm gonna call on Glenn Chaltis, our representative here, for the guy that's putting this all together for us. Glenn, if you want to just review for a couple minutes on that, that'd be great.
Happy
Thanks.
to. We're going to run the meeting format the same as we did at our meeting 2 weeks ago. The only change to the overall meeting format tonight is that the meeting is rented at 6:30, and we're going to try to adjourn this meeting by about 6:10 so that they can break down the equipment and get the room ready for the next group that comes in. So my remarks will be brief. In anticipation of this meeting, for the members of the Update Committee, I've prepared briefing books. These are meant to be sort of strategic overviews of these topics to generate discussion amongst the group and input and feedback from the community about the types of things that either are in here that shouldn't be, are in here that are good and should be strengthened or maintained, things perhaps that we may want to take out or not make priorities for us in the future. So the purpose of the briefing books is kind of set the stage for discussion of things that are going to help Branford be a successful and high quality of life community in the future. The basic approach that we're going to use is similar to what we did last time. There are groups that have been invited who have input on the topics. We'll hear from them first. At that point in time, we'll give an overview. I'll give a quick overview of the booklets. We'll open it up for a discussion with the community that's here today, and final comments at the end. Sound like a battle plan? Mr. Chair, can I see who's here?
Yes.
Town Center Revitalization Review Board.
Here.
Please come to the microphone and tell us what you think our priorities ought to be.
Good evening. I'm Norbert Church, and I am the chairman of the Town Center Revitalization Review Board. Really, a very, very brief comments, I think, from our perspective, and that is, we're certainly engaged in so much of what has been going on in our overlay district, which includes the new Atlantic Wharf project. It's going to include a new boutique hotel. So there's a lot happening in our district. And with that, one of the things that we've been continuing to kind of speak out about for many years is making the downtown area more walkable. And by that, really what we're looking for is continued plan of sidewalks, and particularly sidewalks running from the Atlantic Wharf project into the center of town. We also coincidentally happen to have the new senior center and rec department, which will be right on that path, and it makes perfect sense to make sure that that is very pedestrian friendly. And number two is we have sidewalks now about 3/4 of the way around the green, and we're hoping that, to see a sidewalk that eventually will completely circumnavigate the green. With projects going on with the library and the proposed roundabout in the vicinity of the library, again, the improvement of sidewalks from the center of town, past St. Mary's, past the library, and into the Fourth Ward are quite paramount to us. The other aspect of transportation, if you will, not having to do with vehicular transportation, is bicycle transportation. And so we are hoping that as part of the plan of development that additional, I don't think we have any right now, that where we have a network of bike lanes and bike paths that go around the town center and lead in and out of the town center. So I think those are just briefly the things that we are looking for the town center. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we're hoping to hear from the Chamber of Commerce. Anybody here from the Chamber? We invited the dock master. I understood they didn't have any issues they needed or felt they needed to share with us this evening. East Shore Health Department. Perfect.
Good evening. My name is Michael Pascasell, and I'm the Director of Health for the East Shore District Health Department. First and foremost, I wouldn't be a good health director if I didn't bring this up. Is we're in the midst of a flu crisis, and we are having a increase in flu locally. So this weekend at our office at East Main Street, we're having a free flu clinic. Whether you have insurance or not, we're giving out free vaccines. So please spread the word. I have a flyer here, and I'll leave it out for anyone. So I broke our topics into 3 different categories. So as a local health department, the first one I want to talk about is subsurface disposal systems, septic systems. Here in Branford, we're very lucky that we have a subsidized program, and we've been working with the town and trying to see how we could promote it, and in general, we're doing a good job. But we do have some areas that we have to consider for future development. Specifically, I'll bring up Stony Creek, beautiful area, but we don't have public sewers there. And that's okay, but one of the things we have to realize is as that tide rises through climate change, and it is real, it is happening, that we have to do smart development. We're working with our partners on that, and it's just something to consider because the effluent, the waste we put in the ground, only so much could be absorbed before we start contaminating groundwater, which in turn flows into Long Island Sound, affects our swimming areas, our beaches, and so we really need to protect Long Island Sound. I think we have a good plan. I'm happy to report we've done a lot of water quality analysis, and we're not really finding high bacterial levels. We're actually doing a good job. We want to keep it that way. The second thing, and it was brought up by the person who just spoke, and that's sidewalks. I call it the public health built environment, and it's about quality of life. Sidewalks, bike paths. One of the reasons why people live in this beautiful community is because we have great parks. We have our beaches, and I know there's a plan to extend some of those areas so they connect. In my travels, looking at progressive cities like Branford, one of the things that I would like to see as we move forward is trying to connect all those sidewalks, having bike paths. And along the way, sometimes you see workout areas, and it's also a great way of doing messaging, about health, about our community. It gets people engaged. Kids love it, and I would love to continue that conversation. And I know there is a plan for some of that, but I figured I would mention it. Also, we're seeing more electric cars, so maybe charging stations. Air pollution is a problem, and we're starting to see more and more electric cars. So we have some charging stations where we are, but we could maybe put them in other areas, and there's some grant money for that. So it's something we should consider. And lastly, and it's a complex issue, and I'm just going to talk briefly about it, and that's climate change. Being so close to Long Island Sound, it's a gift and it could be complex because we have seen the effects of climate change. I will tell you, I regularly drive through salt water, and I have car bills to prove it. Maybe other people here have some of those bills also. And so we just need to think about coastal resilience. I will tell you, the town of Branford, when we look at other communities, we are way ahead of the game. Because we've participated in some plans, and we do have some plans, and now we have to figure out how we're going to fund some of those projects. But the tide is rising, and we have to think about development in the future and what that looks like. And that's all I have tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Economic Development Commission.
Chair,
That's all right.
Yeah?
I'm closer.
okay.
Terry Hilton from Town Hall, primarily with Economic Development here on behalf of Perry Maresca, who may walk in momentarily. So we've tried to lay out a few things the way the booklet is formatted, just so it's easy to follow. So under 4B, the strategies, we would expand the ongoing efforts to enhance the town center for its social and civic activity. And we're talking about things along the lines of more events like the jazz concert series. That's been enormously successful, drawing a lot of people from the region to the town center. As identified in the TOD, establish a wayfinding signage system that directs visitors and tourists to destinations, including parking, not only in the town center, but throughout town. Implement a transit shuttle to connect the town center with the train station, marinas, and other high traffic areas. Reinforce the nodes as identified in the EDC's target business study for new and expanding businesses, concentrated along the I-95 exits. 5C for economic development, again under strategies. We did look at various tax incentives over the past 8 years or so. We would like to revisit that and perhaps this time put some specific attention on TIFs, tax incremental financing programs, and see how that might be applied to certain areas in Branford. We'd like to determine a desired targeted business mix with an emphasis on advanced manufacturing and bioscience, and also introducing an appropriate level of tourism. We have a certain historical, cultural attraction for tourism, but now, especially with Stony Creek Brewery and the other breweries, we have our own beer trail. It's taken on a whole new dimension, and we want to take advantage of that. And create maybe some sort of public-private initiative to work with the Connecticut Department of Transportation and others to try to move forward the efforts to get full access to I-95 at the Branford Connector and Commercial Parkway. And I'll provide a copy of this to the committee, and they can post it on the website.
Thank you very much. Housing Authority.
Mike Coulter from the Branford Housing Authority. Just a very simple request that we would like Parkside, particularly Parkside 1, to be included on the transportation loop that's being proposed. It's probably going to run right by down Stony Creek, or sorry, down Indian Neck Road over to Mondelez. So we're right at that corner. We're near Slaney Field and Foot Park, and particularly if one of the lines ends up going out to the Fort Lenny's and the stand in that area, we'd like to be included on that loop.
Thank you. Planning and zoning is on the list, but realistically the work that we're doing is going to go to planning and zoning. So next one is Stony Creek Village District Architectural Review Board.
Hi, I'm Greg Ames, Chairman of the Stony Creek Architectural Review Board, and I have things typed out here, so it should go There's a lot here, but I'll try to be brief. And, I want to thank you for soliciting our board's participation in the process. And as requested, this report speaks to changes since the 2008 plan. It'll focus on issues from the perspective of Stony Creek, which is our board's area of responsibility. But we think it's important to recognize that many of our concerns will be shared by the town's other shorefront communities. You should observe at this point that the first thing I'd like to talk about is Stony Creek Village District. And it's interesting to note that the Stony Creek Village District arose out of a recommendation in the 2008 plan. So please be aware that things do happen as a result of plan. It was adopted as an amendment to the zoning regulations in February of 2015. Its goal is to protect, enhance, and maintain the character and scale of the village. District regulation is supplemented by design guidelines, which are provided to applicants. And the submittal process affords applicants an understanding of the village's goals, which I think is important because it engenders a process of feedback and discussion with the applicants. And in a sense, it's education of the applicant. It helps them understand what our needs and concerns are, and engenders a very constructive process. We think the regulation has already had a positive impact on the village, notably with the Legacy Theater, which is currently going through an informal review in front of my board. And we'd like to think that it bears consideration as a model for other Branford neighborhoods. Let's talk for a minute about the Stony Creek business and institutional community. Stony Creek is unique among town villages in having numerous strong, vibrant, small businesses that contribute to the identity, vitality, and cohesiveness of the village. Since 2008, we've established a home for the Stony Creek Museum. We finally achieved public restrooms, and we're now seeing restoration of the theater building. The identity of the village is further defined by the Stony Creek Post Office, which should be preserved and protected as both an important service and a valued point of social interaction. We really need to continue to support these institutions and businesses and to address some of the challenges that they present. Parking is a problem, continues to be an issue. Off-street parking needs to be encouraged. The boat ramp needs to be rebuilt. Kayak launching area needs to be established to avoid conflict with trailers at the ramp. Consideration needs to be given to a summer shuttle service to move visitors from outlying parking lots to destinations along Thimble Islands Road. Sidewalks, as was observed relative to the town center and the health district, must be maintained and expanded. Allowance should be made for defined bikeway down the center of the spine of the village. Access to open space pathways should be adequately signed, defined. Parking areas should be established for walkers. Street trees along Thimble Islands Road have been removed due to age and damage and should be replaced with new plantings. The matter of housing affordability. As a shorefront community, rising property values and commensurate and unfortunately now non-deductible property taxes have been increasing. McMansionization is a potential problem that threatens the unique diversity of the village, especially for older people, younger families, long-time residents. Consideration ought to be given to measures like encouraging increased use of accessory apartments or stringent bulk limitations, investigating the prevention of merging of building lots. Subject of transportation, parking, traffic. Parking needs are unusual in Stony Creek, as everybody knows, and they're worsening. Public parking competes with the needs of residential parking, which is primarily street side. Public parking has to accommodate islanders, boaters, tour boat patrons, beachgoers, shop patrons, kayakers, summer visitors, parents and children using the parks. And the problem continues to evade adequate solution. We're thinking consideration might be given to greater reliance on other transportation forms, a public transit shuttle, bicycle and walking paths, bicycle parking locations. We wonder if thought might be given to the restoration of a railroad station in Stony Creek. Speeding, also seen as a dangerous situation, a serious and growing problem. We think that could be helped by further traffic calming measures, especially during the summer. Enhanced education, stricter enforcement. Federal Railroad Administration and the Connecticut DOT are talking about additional tracks through the village to serve high-speed rail service. This is seen, obviously, by the village as a potential very serious threat to the future and character of our village. We want to see response to these plans coordinated with secoast.org and with other Connecticut towns. I'm going to skip what I've said here about in the report about environmental impacts because it's already been addressed tonight, and I expect is going to be very carefully addressed by Peter Henschel. So thanks for your opportunity to present.
The other invited speaker tonight, anybody here from the Zoning Board of Appeals? So, Mr. Chair, what I propose to do is kind of give an overview of the briefing booklets, just quickly go through them as we have before so that people are familiar in the audience, if you will, the briefing books, and then open it up for a discussion.
So you want to leave further discussion until we finish up with these?
Yeah, I think once the public has had a chance to hear what the committee members feel.
Okay.
So there were 4 booklets prepared. Tonight's topic is really about sort of development-related issues, and this is how we might, as a community, guide growth or change in Branford in the future. There were 4 booklets put together for the committee. The PowerPoint is not meant to be legible from the back of the room. It's really just to give you a sense of the type of material. All of the booklets are online on the town website. You can actually access them on your phone if you're here in the room and would like to, or you can look at them later at your pleasure. The first of which is a booklet about guiding and managing community structure. Community structure is an overall concept related to sort of how we have organized our community and where things are located. The essential recommendation of this booklet is to guide and manage community structure, recognize the fact that we have Branford Center as sort of being the main focal point of our community, but we also have other centers in Stony Creek, in Pine Orchard, Indian Neck, Short Beach. We have our industrial area in the northeast corner of town. We have commercial activities and uses along the Route 1 corridor. And to try to organize activities in these areas to support the things that Greg Ames just talked about, for example, and try to find ways to enhance the sense of place overall in Branford. The big yellow arrow, which is on this page, is a question really for this committee to consider, which is, we had talked earlier and also at the public meeting back in November about trying to encourage or enhance other types of nodes in the community. And the question is if we want to do this and where and how we might do that. So this is the type of topic, again, that would come under this overall concept of community structure, which again is sort of the basic skeletal framework of how Branford is organized and how we can reinforce this in the future. The next booklet, 5B, is about enhancing Branford Center. The Branford Center was in the structure chapter in the last plan, so the discussion of Branford Center kind of got mixed up with some of the areas, and given the attention that's been focused in the comments we heard tonight from the Town Center Revitalization Review Board, et cetera, we've broken it out as a separate chapter. I think there's quite a bit that's happened recently with the TOD study and the activities, redevelopment in the harbor area. And the plan recommends, in terms of strategies and things moving forward, that we build on that. We try to find ways to keep Branford Center vibrant, keep the uses and activities there, to keep it a focal point in the community, that we look at ways to enhance access and parking within the town center area. to retain and enhance the sense of place. This relates again to design review and activities which are proposed in the town center area. To try to coordinate public and private efforts in the town center area. There are individual property owners, there's things that the town can do, but there's also situations that we can get the assistance of the Connecticut Main Street program to support businesses and other activities, and also look at other ways to promote cooperation to keep the center active, vibrant, and special. There is a suggestion in here for discussion about revisiting the zoning boundaries in the districts. There's quite a lot of zoning districts in the town center area, and exactly where they fall sometimes doesn't really make sense. And it might be important for us to have a more holistic view of how we'd like to encourage and guide activities in the town center area, which areas are subject to design review, which are not. And then the last recommendation related to the town center is promoting transit-oriented development. And again, this comes out of the study which was recently completed in the fall of 2017 in terms of some zoning recommendations, et cetera, to try to make the pedestrian connections, to reinforce the town center area, tie the harbor to the town center, and try to find ways to implement supportive projects in this area for both new development, redevelopment, et cetera. The third booklet, which
Glenn,
is, yes?
I just have a question. On page 9 of this second book here, you have a question about, is the town center just the Burgundy area?
Yep.
What do you mean by that?
In terms of the activities, if we thought about what is our primary activity area in the center, and then what our zoning regulations permit or encourage, the red area on this map, I'll move here for a moment, is the town center zoning, which is everything sort of north of the green or across the street from the green. And it goes quite a ways back on some of those secondary streets, et cetera. Mm-hmm. But in fact, it's really the street front along Main Street, which is our primary activity area. And so what we might want to do is revisit that, extend this activity area along Main Street to create a vibrant place which has activities that encourage people to walk, meander, and visit, as opposed to the situation where sometimes now we get off Main Street, get onto the back secondary streets, it becomes quasi-residential, there's parking lots, it doesn't really have the same character and feel. So is our zoning accomplishing what we might want it to, or should we take that area and sort of squash it down and stretch it out to promote active pedestrian street front uses to support tourism and tie it back, et cetera?
Because I mean, I think my thought with the answer to that question is yes, that it should be all the way around the green, and especially now with Atlantic Wharf and some of the other stuff that's happening, really stretching down into that part of town. Yeah, this is a very 50s zoning look, I think, at this point.
And I think the way the town center behaves, the zoning doesn't really sort of reflect that. So the two of them are there's a little bit of tension, if you will, in terms of things that people might want to do that are could really strengthen and support the center, but zoning doesn't permit them. And so can we create a more rational approach? And so that was this suggestion. Bill?
Yeah, it's interesting hearing what Phil has to say and what you had to say. I mean, I think of the town center, and I think I have a more expansive idea of what constitutes the town center. Basically, any residential area that's within easy walking distance of the green, I consider part of the town center. Sure. And yet, you're not defining it that way. So I think maybe that's a conversation that we want to have with, later on.
No, I think.
Well, I think this is the business center, I think, is what the zone refers to, that burgundy or whatever that color is.
That burgundy area
is more business related, but it doesn't extend, it misses a lot of the areas that are more actively business areas.
Right, and I recognize that there may be a number of different definitions that are used for different activities or things. I mean, there's the revitalization district is obviously larger than that.
That's an excellent point, because the revitalization review area covers a much larger area than what we traditionally think about as the town green. We go all the way out almost to the Pretzel and all the way up to the high school. So it's, there's it's a much bigger area, and then down all the way to the Stony Creek Brewery and, that whole area, so.
I think that question was related to the fact that some of the areas around the town center, which clearly are residential, should probably continue to be residential, aren't actually zoned residential.
Right.
And then other areas, we may want to sort of support the business uses. So I think rather than persist with zoning, which has been there perhaps since the 50s, it might make sense for us to revisit that and say our primary area will be, in terms of businesses and mixed uses and activities, the Main Street corridor, and then on the side streets it'll be our secondary areas, the residential areas, etc.
But I think we have an opportunity here to look at some mixed uses into all of those areas around the center of town, because I think that's what makes an area vital. Having a little restaurant on the corner in a residential neighborhood, I think is a nice vision, I think.
One quick comment. I think one of the things we could look at also is what would you get out of the existing zoning? And I think what is built, particularly along Main Street, is not necessarily reflective of the ultimate allowance in that BC zone. So I think taking a look at that, making sure the community understands what that is that what they want? Is that what you don't want? I mean, hopefully as part of this we can get some clarity about that.
A lot of it has to do with parking too, which is,
absolutely.
Right. Which obviously is a problem to begin with, and if that zone gets expanded, then the parking becomes a bigger problem. Unless we take some steps to, create a real parking, situation.
Yeah, a lot of factors.
So there was a parking study done of the town center area back in 2006, and it discovered at that point in time there was enough parking spaces in the town center area. The problem was that there was a mismatch between where the demand was and where the supply was. And that creates a problem, again, where people say, well, geez, I can never find parking there. Not that they can never,
right.
but they burn out from trying.
And a lot of it has to do with the beginning of Montague Street there, where there's a lot of parking behind all those buildings there, but we could never get it joined together so that it was cohesive.
And so one of the things we talked about as part of the wayfinding study element of the TOD was how to sort of let people know the opportunities that are around.
Yeah, we don't have those traditional parking signs that are in most cities where, because if you drive into a city, you can usually find a place to park by looking for those traditional signs.
But if people come here, even if it's for the brewery, they're coming to Stony Creek or something else, they're going through the town center, but they don't think there's any parking there, they won't stop, they'll keep going. And perhaps we could find ways to encourage them to stay, to linger, which will make it a more vibrant, active place, and that will support other uses, et cetera. So absolutely. I think part of the POCD here is to kind of get to our vision for the downtown and then figure out the strategies that will support it. And I certainly think that one of the outcomes for this as that activity occurs is then try to get our zoning in line to make sure that we accomplish the things we want to. Any other thoughts in terms of the basic approaches or strategies to the town center from the committee?
Yeah, I kind of envision the town center as a donut where you've got the Main Street, Meadow Street, Montague, and Kirkham as your major throughways.
Yeah.
That should be maybe, encouraging the business uses, encouraging parking. And then I sort of see the yellow area in the middle as things that makes that more of that mixed use. And so I'm kind of looking at, I'm not sure how the zoning can best support that, but I think we've clearly moved away from the industrial era, and then that purple really wants to change to the red. To me, I'm seeing that as one sort of mauve red and kind of donut, and then protecting the R1 towards the center, and then integrating that with the hierarchy in terms of the streetscapes and the walkability and the greenways and so forth, because you still have those important social amenities within the green, the Hammerfield, the senior center, and so forth.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because I think the TOD study focused, if you will, the focal point of that was on the harbor area, the area around the train station, and the town center was at the periphery. I think what we need to do is sort of take the same analysis and turn it back, looking from the town center towards and tie them together. And I think at that point in time, it becomes an active, vibrant center with connections. There are residential neighborhoods in between, stay residential, but to strengthen the connections and everything else so people feel that it is a holistic village, et cetera.
Glenn, I have just one more question, going back to the page 6 under A2B, where it talks about passive uses, to consider modifying regulations to discourage passive uses, such as offices, banks, real estate, insurance, similar uses at street level. So if those are what active uses besides restaurants, what other, if you're discouraging those uses, what are considered more active uses for those
Very,
spaces?
very delicate balance, I think.
I mean, obviously, retail is what we all want.
Retail
right?
is certainly one of them. There's a wonderful video on YouTube, I think it's from Ann Arbor, Michigan, where they did an analysis of the activity levels on streetscapes. So I think if you put in active streetscape Ann Arbor, you'll come to it. And what they did is college students evaluated the activity levels in a college town downtown. And what they found was that people assess a block and decide whether or not it's worth their time investing to cross the street to do the next block. And if they see a dead streetscape or activities which don't visually interest them, they say, I'm not going to bother going any further. So the challenge, I think, in a downtown area is to create what I call sort of a wet edge, like when you're painting. There's always just one more thing, and before you know it, people have visited more of the area. So the challenge is that some of these uses, which are very destination oriented, you don't go to the bank or walk by a bank and say, I'm going to take out a loan, or I'm going to make a deposit, or something that's a purpose-driven trip. They want the exposure, but the effect that they can have on the street is not as strong as other uses. Forbidding those uses is a very delicate situation, et cetera. So some towns have been trying to find the right balance, et cetera. And I think just being cognizant and aware is really the main thing here to try to promote more and more activity on the street. I went to Google Earth as part of our analysis here, and up and down Route 1 Main Street to figure out where the highest pedestrian activity areas were. And it's very interesting to see what you see on the maps in terms of where people are and where people aren't. And so how do we try to promote that type of activity? Because seeing people attracts more people, and that's exactly what you'd like to have happen. Anything else on the Branford Center strategies at this point? I think, again, we'll be coming back to these booklets in the future as we move forward, so we're not finalizing, if you will. Booklet 5C is about promoting economic development in Branford. Our economic development structure overall, we do have the industrial zoning area in the northeast part of town. We do have commercial zoning along the Route 1 corridor, and we do have some other areas along the waterfront for marinas or other types of uses like that overall. Branford is fortunate both in terms of its history and in terms of the transportation infrastructure today that supports the positive economic environment. The strategies and recommendations in the plan here for discussion is to continue to support economic development in the community overall. It provides jobs for people, it provides goods and services, and it provides net tax revenue that supports the other things we want to try to accomplish in the community. Also to support existing businesses. The last plan didn't really state that. There's jobs in the community for over 12,000 people, and those businesses are doing a great job, and we're going to continue to support them. The plan recommends, in addition to that, we look at ways to attract new economic development, as Terry indicated, targeted industries that bioscience, advanced manufacturing, other things like that that will strengthen the economic clusters which are already here. Promote tourism overall. Because of Stony Creek, because of the brewery, because of the Shoreline Greenway Trail, because of the trail around Branford, the open spaces, the other things like that, we have a unique opportunity to really kind of leverage on this if we can pull some of these things together as a cohesive whole. And that, again, will bring more traffic to Main Street and other types of activities. So calling out tourism is one of the suggestions in here. There is a section here about enhancing economic opportunity areas. I think there's a couple in here. Town center in the villages, as Terry indicated, supporting what happens there. Exit 53 is an area right now which has half an interchange. It's a source of congestion, a railroad bridge. The overall roadway system that kind of feeds traffic into it's a challenge area for us, but it's also an opportunity area, something for us to look at and consider. The Route 1 corridor, how we might guide development or redevelopment along the Route 1 corridor. And then the industrial and other areas in town in terms of the types of uses or activities that are proposed there. For example, we're using a business zone right now for marina uses. Now the marina uses are likely to continue to be in strong demand, so there's not a switch. But actually, if the marina use wasn't, it's zoned for business and could attract a store or something else that was probably not what we anticipated there. So maybe we want to revisit that, and as part of our coastal analysis and everything else, set up a marina district to allow for marinas to be there. But if there was going to be a change after that, not to be surprised, something like that. A similar type of situation, I think the Connecticut Hospice is in a business zone. And the issue is, again, I'm not sure I see that use going anywhere in the foreseeable future, but it's a business zone in the middle of a residential area. And in fact, what we might do is permit that in a residential zone. So again, the sanctity, if you will, of the residential zone doesn't become upended later. So I think to look at some of these areas, both for the economic opportunities that are there and provide land use guidance. Is there anything in this booklet that jumped out at people, or something concerned you or excited you?
Question.
Yeah.
And this actually goes back to the first booklet, I think, where you talk about nodes.
Yep.
I remember from the 2008 that one of the areas suggested for a possible node was in the exit 56 area. And it's not suggested for one here. I'm just wondering what the reasoning was for that.
I think the concept that in the 2008 plan was really sort of referring to it as sort of economic areas or whatever. And I think it's important for us to start thinking about transitioning these nodes to be more like mixed use activity areas. And given the heavy industrial character out at 56 and the retail, et cetera, it didn't hit me as being the right opportunity to try to insert that without upsetting some of the industrial uses that are there. And I thought there was more fertile ground in some of the other areas. So that was the thought process there for discussion.
Yeah, I agree that there's a real challenge in figuring out what the best development is in that area. My sense is that there's actually quite a lot of residential within a fairly small radius of exit 56. And I'll mention this when we get to the housing, but there are a number of mobile home parks there, and many of those are in business zone along Route 1. And I think that this presents, I mean, it's going to present a challenge for the town if those areas are redeveloped for business. That's a lot of affordable, I mean, even though it doesn't qualify as affordable under the statute, it's still relatively, low-cost housing. And so some thought ought to be given to whether the town really wants to look at that area as more of a mixed use that would include residential.
Yep. I think I'll mark that, as we had at our last meeting identified some issues, if you will, to carry over for further discussion. I think exit 56 is a good one. So thank you, Bill. Anything else on the economic development framework? So booklet 5D now is one related to residential development in the community. The vast majority of land in Branford is zoned for residential development, so most of the land in the community is used for residential development overall. The basic residential zoning framework in Branford is we have higher density residential areas which are in the town center area, and then along the shoreline in some of the areas and out in Branford Hills as well. While housing construction had been robust in prior decades, it has slowed down. We are becoming a more mature community, and so the opportunities for major subdivisions and major developments are not what they once were. And the question becomes one for us as to how we address the housing needs which are likely to occur in the community today. There's two housing needs which we think are becoming more and more apparent over time. The first of which is housing for an aging population. That as people age, they look for smaller houses with more services available. Does Branford have a good housing stock to address that? We've got a number of multifamily units, apartments and condominiums, et cetera, that we do. That's the good news. The challenge can be that some of the units were built at a time that the way we tend to live today isn't reflected in the units, so they're not at grade access for older people. They involve going up and down stairs and other things like that. And the second need that was pointed out also is the concept of housing that is more affordable. The days of pensions and Social Security being enough, et cetera, are a challenge. People are going to have to live longer on IRAs and other types of situations. Finding housing that is affordable, both for people who are retired and people who are not, is likely to continue to be an issue in the community. As I'm sure we're aware, Branford is still subject to the Affordable Housing Appeals Procedure, and how we might find our way through to establishing a moratorium is something for us to think about. The recommended framework for residential development is to continue to guide, manage residential development, to protect the neighborhoods that we have, encourage housing maintenance and improvement, address housing choices and opportunities. There was a housing needs assessment that was done in 1990. There is the opportunity to reevaluate that given the circumstances almost 30 years later in terms of housing. And to evaluate opportunities to get a moratorium under 830G, provide for affordable housing and housing for an aging population. There are also 2 pages in this booklet, which are the blue pages here, which are examples of strategies that communities from around New England have been using to address affordable housing in the community, to provide more units, either through direct construction of units or public-private partnerships, other things like that. So for Branford moving ahead, it is an opportunity for us to pick up items on this list and move forward, if you will, to support or provide for affordable housing. Thoughts from the committee? I apologize, there's 3 pages actually, the blue boxes, I apologize. Thoughts from the committee in terms of the housing framework?
Just a comment on the map. That, I mean, I look at all these residential areas and I'm going, wait a minute, that's open space, that's open space. And it's fine that we have a map that sort of has residential, but in terms of looking at potential for future development, a lot of these areas, the big parcels in there, really don't have any potential because they've already been protected as open space. So there's a need to go back and forth between the open space map and the earlier booklet and this one to get a sense of.
That's a good point. Yeah, so what we were trying to do here is reflect the residential density zoning, how the town is configured today in terms of density. But I think Bill brings up a good point that our opportunities, et cetera, become clearer if we add the open space. We've added the non-residential zone, as in that's not land generally used for residential. It would make sense for us to do the same type of approach for open space. Yep.
I think Bill made a good point earlier about the low-cost housing, and I think there's a disconnect between what the state allows for affordable housing and the reality in Branford as far as that 3%. And I don't know how we, get past that, but I do think that if we took a look at where the affordable housing is, or maybe create a sense of where could it go for low cost or affordable, so that they're near public transportation lines, or elderly, so they're in buildings that are elevator buildings, because we have so many condos that are all 2-story condos without first floor masters. So, I think that might be an interesting way to look at some of the housing concerns.
Thank you. So I think from the booklets that we've been talking about today, I think the issue which I've carried over for discussion, if you will, at a future wrap-up session includes Exit 56. Anything else, either in terms of community structure, Branford Center, economic development, or residential development you'd like us to carry over for?
I don't know what you mean by carryover.
I'm keeping a separate list, if you will, of things that we definitely want to put onto our discussion list for our February 22nd working session. Yeah,
I would just say the relationship between future development in industrial businesses relative to the downtown, because I think those could be competing influences, and they need to work in balance with each other so that we and sort of the triangle that would be the residential, but just from a business standpoint, I think there's two distinct types of retail business, live, work, play kind of situations, and then there's more of the manufacturing, heavier kind of thing, and how you balance that would be important for me to consider.
Thank you. So, Mr. Chairman, I think at this point in time in the meeting, it's an opportunity for public comment, I think.
Good evening, and
just jump in. Thank you very much. I think if you could just give us your name so everybody knows who you are.
Yes, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
My name's Gary Ottenbright. I live at 1 Oak Street. I'm a new resident to Branford. I'm going into my second year. I actually retired to Branford because I really think Branford, after all the towns I looked at, I like the idea that Branford, to me, is one town that always seemed to try to move forward. Keeping the historical perspective of Branford being New England type town, but also taking into perspective the future. And the POCD is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. So, in my experience, in my retirement, it's been government. I had 35 years military, 45 years of Social Security Administration. So I want to say something in a humorous manner, just to set the stage here. That is a couple of things I learned. One, from working for Social Security, that government is never fair and it's never logical. All right? So I want to say that, not in an insulting way, but to make sure that we keep an open mind. And the other thing I learned from my military perspective is that anything, and I mean anything, is possible if you plan for it. So in saying that, I want to mention, and this I'm going to refer to the more or less for the Branford Center portion. What I'd like to have the committee think about is even maybe do a feasibility study. When we talk about bringing people into town, trying to keep them there, wanting to improve our retail and business, one of the things I want to suggest is thinking about the possibility in the future of having no cars in the center. Now, I know that sounds kind of silly, but I think with the new future, with the different ways that we have people movers, being able to move people around, think of it like an airport, where you can get from one end to an airport in Ohio, New York airport, you go from one end to the other on a people mover. If we have something like that, and just take cars out, we don't have to worry about parking. We have more open land that we can do things with, because we don't have to park a car there. And the other thing it does, which I think is important in reference to what you were talking about, the study with the college students, I think what happens is the biggest advantage to having people in the town and use it is time. If they're in town longer, we have a better chance of them doing and supporting the retail and business in town. We have a better chance of bringing more people into town. And if we have some way of them not driving, coming in and getting out in 2 seconds, we bring them in as a people mover and we keep them in town, and they'll walk from one place to another. There's, I think, a greater chance that we would take the advantage of them helping the center of the town and helping the retail and everything. So I know it sounds like a kind of a futuristic impossibility, but as I said, when we think about government and how it works, it's not meant to be logical, it's not meant to be fair, it's just meant to get things done. And anything, if we think about it hard enough, and what you've proven because of your studies, anything is possible. So I just like to open up the idea of a feasibility study of maybe some type of a people mover, and think in terms of that perspective, and think in terms of possibly being one of the first towns in the country where we just eliminate cars. Yeah, that's all I have.
Thank you.
No problem.
Evening, everybody. David Minicozy. I was here a week ago to speak as the chairman of the Branford Green Committee. I'm here again in that same capacity. I understand a comment was made earlier, something about extending the sidewalks out on the green all the way around the green, including South Main Street. Just a little bit of history. The sidewalk that's running along South Main Street right now was installed back in 2014 as part of a 2012 grant from something called the STEEP program, S-T-E-A-P, Small Town Employment Something Program. I don't know what the A stands for. So the money was allocated in 2012. They went to install the sidewalks in 2014, but we discovered in the meantime that there's something called the Connecticut Notable Trees Program, which is a designation that this program goes throughout the state, and they find like the biggest, nicest tree in the town of that particular cultivar and species and designate these trees. Well, it turns out the Branford Green has at least 5 notable trees on it, some of which are state champions, one of which is a national champion, which is the false cypress in back of the newly configured playground.
What are they doing to that today?
I'm sorry?
Why were they chopping that all up today?
Oh, they're taking off the dead branches.
Yeah, they took a lot of branches.
Yeah, the town arborist, Care of Trees, has been out there for the past week taking off dead branches.
Good.
So in any event, we discovered these wonderful treasures that happen to be on the Branford Green. So when they went to put the sidewalks in, we realized that they were going to run these sidewalks all the way up South Main Street and across the roots of some of these 100-year-old cherry trees up there. And we got an arborist out to say that the sidewalks were either going to damage these trees or kill them. The thought was, great, we're going to put sidewalks in so somebody can walk by and say, that's where the championship trees used to be. So we worked out something with the first selectman where instead of putting the sidewalks down the street, they took some of the money and replaced some of the asphalt sidewalks that were running across the green up by the Baptist church. So that's why you have those brick sidewalks up there instead of running along the street. So now the point being, if they're going to be running sidewalks up along South Main Street again, like we just got done fighting against 4 years ago, problem is back. So I want you to think about the balance between development and preservation. The Green Committee is about preservation of the green, making small improvements, that's true, but one of the things that makes the green a great place is the fact that it's got national championship trees on it. And we don't want to kill them, and I'm sure there's a smart way to do this, but the smart way to do it is not to put the sidewalks in that we fought so hard against. There's got to be a different way. I'm not sure what it is, but I just thought you should know about this before you go ahead and implement the plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Peter Henschel. I'm on the RTM District 2 representative. I'm also on the Stony Creek Association POCD subcommittee, but my comments this evening are purely my own and not meant to represent either one of those two groups. I'd like to digress for a minute and speak a little bit to the subject of last session because I've had a chance to reflect on some of the topics discussed there and then speak in addition on the development question of tonight. Dramatic changes in the public awareness over the past decade would seem to indicate that for the 2018 POCD, with its 10-year planning window, coastal and environmental issues should be addressed in their own sections or subsections, major subsections. One of those would be coastal resources and resiliency. The other would be environmental sustainability. We've had a fair amount of comment and testimony about the impact of sea level rise, and I'm not going to reiterate any of things that have been said, but an additional point that I would make that you should, I think, start to take into consideration is that I think that over the next decade, we in fact are going to see property values along the coastal communities dropping relative to other property values, not increasing. And that's going to result in a diminished tax base relative to other properties. So just an additional challenge that we should take into account when we think of sea level rise. But what I do want to offer is some responses that we might start to take to the issue of sea level rise. Communities have found these challenges pretty daunting, in some ways incapacitating. But I think there is a beginning point that we could take. Substantial and continual outreach to the coastal neighborhoods to educate, to provide specific local data, and to discuss solutions and resources, I think, are needed. And this could be done through a dedicated Coastal Resource and Resiliency Commission working alongside Branford's municipal staff. Provision of coastal mapping delineating current and projected encroachments to coastal properties as an informational resource for coastal property owners should be something that we put into place in Branford. Development of individual strategies for each of the coastal neighborhoods, working with the neighborhood associations, I think is one approach to dealing with the coastal communities. Each one has their own unique set of challenges. Some are similarities, but there are differences. They need to be addressed individually. And possible consideration of local regulatory changes that may be needed to accommodate shoreline property resiliency, and even a consideration of property buyback programs in certain locations. Secondly, in response, I think we can start to make a response to environmental sustainability. I think that we need to promote greener buildings and lower impact development in Branford, and that should become a central goal of the community. And considerations might include adopting a program of environmental goals similar to what some of the other U.S. cities have done, establishing regulatory programs that encourage the adoption of private, commercial, and municipal alternative energy solutions, addressing zoning regulation amendments that allow for implementation of alternative energy solutions in buildings and transportation, both individual and possibly communal. Consideration of a town program promoting electric vehicle charging stations has already been mentioned. Possible use of property tax incentives to encourage the adoption of green energy solutions. Possible adoption of local building code regulations requiring the meeting of environmental goals in new building construction. And probably most importantly, to moving some of these ideas forward or exploring them further, would be the establishment of a commission on environmental sustainability to promote change and to provide information and access to resources. Moving to some of the more detailed things discussed in last meeting, in terms of open space, one thing I'd like to add is that you might consider incentives to private land that's to keep it left as open space. We know that public lands and lands held by the land trust are a different issue, but there's a lot of open private land, and some other states have developed programs that have allowed for tax abatements, et cetera, if that land is left as open space, either permanently or temporarily. And secondarily, the possibility of encouraging that in private open space land, there are allowed public right-of-ways for walking and biking. This is done in Europe and a lot of places, and it's a sort of public-private usage of land. In terms of sustainable commercial development, possible steps might include special zoning allowances. These are incentives now. Special zoning allowances for sustainable community development and commercial development, some tax abatements, a possible Energy Star signage recognition program, much further use of EV charging stations in the town center that's been mentioned, and EV dedicated parking spaces in commercial developments could be done in exchange for some other incentives. And then zoning amendments allowing for solar and wind energy solutions. Right now, there are a lot of solar and wind solutions that probably would not be allowed by our zoning regulations. They really should be explored. So secondarily, moving to development, a couple of quick things about development. One thing I'd like to add is that the POCD should recognize that during the next 10 years, the inventory of good developable land will become increasingly limited in Branford. It already is, but it's going to get to, I think, a critical point. The development section of the POCD should map out, I think, and I think Bill's mentioned this, map out the remaining developable land inventory currently, and it should maintain that going forward so that there's access to, you know, where we stand in terms of our available developable land. I think the town's development initiative should focus on high-value innovation enterprise, those that bring the highest tax dollars, good paying employment, and good support of the community. The POCD should recognize the fact that Branford is widely acknowledged to be a hub for bioscience and innovation, and it should plan to protect and enhance that status through this plan. And lastly, given the rapidly changing landscape of retail selling in the U.S., I think great care should be given before approval of significant retail development. You know, I think retail development is great, especially in the town center, but I think we need to be very careful about trends in retail development so that what we do approve is in the best long-term interest. Lastly, a couple of specific locations, and we've talked about the Exit 53 hub and the Exit 56 hub. In Exit 56 hub, I'd like to point out that in that area is probably where most of the good developable land currently resides in town. I think we ought to stop using the term industry and start to think of it as innovation enterprise in terms of, you know, how we're using that land and what it could be used for. And I do think that major retail expansion around the Exit 56 hub should be discouraged to allow for innovation industry to grow and prosper. The Exit 53 hub, I think in the plan, has already had a good plan for the development of the I-95 eastbound access needs. And I think these are really, it should be a critical issue for the town to resolve because it's been holding up, I think, good solutions around Exit 53. Will continue to do so until it's been solved. Streetscape and trees, the POCD should promote the addition of street lining trees where they're missing. Greg's already mentioned that. And I think we also ought to take a special look at Route 1 and possibly think about that as a master plan district with strengthened site design standards for the landscape, streetscape buffer zone. And one last comment specifically about Stony Creek. But I may get a lot of negative feedback for this, but Stony Creek contains about 95% of all the septic systems in town. The village of Stony Creek has classically been very protective of the zoning limitations on development imposed by our lack of sewers, and therefore has been vehemently against the installation of sewers. However, again, as has been mentioned, with sea level rise, our village's systems have become increasingly vulnerable to tidal flooding. This is something we can't avoid. It's going to happen. And the village may, in the future, be the target of state deep efforts pushing for installation of a bona fide sewer system. I do believe that, and I haven't had a lot of discussion with the community on this, but if it weren't for concerns about development, most residents would probably welcome the possibility of sewers, especially since they would allow greater flexibility in making small residential repairs and alterations. So, for consideration, one possible solution that the POCD could propose would be that there be consideration given to recommending that the PZC consider the adoption of an overlay provision for Stony Creek, which would preclude in that area any of the development of advantages brought by sewers within the boundaries of the village, and do that now. If this constraint was to be put in place now, the village might in the future see the benefits of sewers as one possible response to sea level rise. Thank you.
Just a quick request. I know Peter looks like he had pretty well prepared notes, and if other people have also prepared statements, maybe they could send those to the email address and they could be distributed to the committee.
Okay, that's a good idea. My name is Janet Raceman. I live in the eastern part of town. I'd like to commend the members of the POCD Steering Committee for their great work in articulating a very appealing vision of Branford's future, which is near and dear to my heart. I very much like the town center focus, the redevelopment of the riverfront and public access to it, concerns for historic structures and the preservation of the New England village character of the town, the desire to promote tourism, the support for local business, the better design of Route 1, the improving of exits of 53. But I see a couple underlying problems which have bothered me for a long time, and it seems like this is a good forum to bring them out. And the problems are this. One, the liberal use of variances and special exception permits to undermine the intended zoning districts. And two, the potential of the overuse of PDDs. And three, the affordable housing dilemma. Let me address these one at a time. The POCD plan expresses interest in improving the Route 1 corridor and suggests that maybe some of the zoning distinctions don't work. Maybe that's because when zoning began in the 1950s, there was the misbegotten hope that zoning districts could be imposed upon 300 years of building. When considering the mess that is the east end of town along Route 1, it is easy for me to speak from experience. I live in the area, and I have had a lifetime of watching an IG2 zone struggle to maintain consistency. The end result has been far from planned, far from harmonious. We have everything from a sprawling army center to historic structures being used as professional offices. Everything from a noisy, ugly transfer station to 2 houses of worship. Everything from glass curtain office buildings to small private residences grandfathered in. Everything from lumber yards to bioscience parks. There's nothing particularly harmonious about the area. And further afield, along North Main Street, there are big car dealerships, office stores, medical facilities, restaurants, a firehouse, apartments, beauty and appliance suppliers. In early meetings here, dismay was also expressed about the out-of-control development on the Branford Hill. The 2008 POCD encouraged the IG2 district in the east end of town to become a hub for bioscience, and it seems as if the 2018 POCD is going to endorse that vision. Despite the lofty vision of the POCD, however, the reality is far from the wished-for development. There have been many distractions and difficulties sticking with the plan, and the PZC has been under pressure from developers to change zoning intentions there. I urge the town to take its POCD really seriously, more so than it has in the past. More careful development can be possible if the PZC sticks by its zoning plan and is coerced less frequently to grant liberal special exceptions and variances. It seems every proposal these days causes some wrangling over variances and exceptions. The laws created with the POCD in mind should be adhered to without every project becoming a special situation or requiring special dispensation. The criteria laid out by the POCD should be the first priority in any zoning decision. Let's take this plea a step further and say that in fact there needs to be a definitive, enforceable relationship between the POCD and the decisions made by the Zoning Commission. That close connection has been, to date, virtually non-existent. The POCD's aspirations need to be invoked at every meeting and made a reality by the careful deliberations of the Zoning Commission. The POCD should take precedence over an applicant's request for special exceptions and considerations. Only in this way can the town become the town the citizens expect. My second point is that the POCD should address the issue of PDDs, which it doesn't even touch on. Allowing oversized PDDs to become ways for developers to change the zoning of a particular area so they can alter the basic underlying purposes of the original zone and mess with the zoning regulations' original intentions, and more importantly, with the aspirations of the POCD, is completely wrong and not in the best interest of the town and its tax-paying citizens. In fact, adjacent communities force PDDs to commit to abide by the underlying zoning, and such has been made clear by recent legal wrangling over PDDs in New Haven, where compliance with underlying zoning is now the norm. My third point is that Branford is facing a housing crunch of the most precarious kind. The state requires each town to make 10% of its housing stock available for lower income individuals, and as you've heard tonight, the current amount in Branford is 3%. I was astounded to read in a booklet prepared for this meeting on housing development, and I quote from page 5, to meet the 10% threshold, we would have to create, quote, 946 affordable units. Continuing the quote, this is more units than Branford has built in the last 25 years and would represent about 60% of all the remaining build-out potential in Branford. That's an astounding situation. That would suggest that only 40%, and I think it's already been mentioned, 40% of the remaining undeveloped land is available for non-residential development. Pretty soon, developments will have to be denied simply because the town is built out and cannot meet state housing requirements and is in a bind under Connecticut General Statute 830. So therefore, maybe we should reconsider all the development energy of being poured into commercial and retail development and perhaps designate some of it for affordable housing. We should also be aware of creative developers taking advantage of the situation in residential areas. If a developer proposes an outsized low-income housing project, let's say a 10-story high-rise on an acre of land in a residential zone, the PZZ could be powerless to deny it because of the statute 830. Because the town is undersupplied with affordable housing, the state could potentially force the town to allow any housing developments proposed for the town, whether they are in keeping with the rest of the town or not. Thus, a developer could, without the interference of the PZZ and our zoning laws, put up a high-rise on 1 acre with no setbacks and insufficient parking. Branford must act briskly to address these inequities in housing if we have a prayer of keeping our village-like character as we love it. We know we should definitely see what our low-income, we could definitely improve our low-income housing situation. It doesn't have to be clustered all in the same place. It doesn't have to be high-rise. It can be in several attractive smaller housing developments that are in keeping with the town. Perhaps we should rethink some of the push here in town for big retail and big development and be sure we meet the state's requirements for housing first. This should be a very important priority. Raising the percentage of affordable housing wouldn't create as much traffic, and it wouldn't possibly involve as much impervious surface as, say, big box stores. I do not know why there is a for sale sign in front of the trailer park at 525 East Main Street, but if it is sold and is used for development of large commercial buildings, then we will lose more of our low-income housing stock, and Branford zoning laws will be at the mercy of profit-driven creative developers. And the state will be bound to uphold fair housing laws here in Branford. Branford citizens should take the lead in getting their town in compliance with state requirements and making the town a pleasant, peaceful place to live for everyone who wants to be here. Thank you.
If I could just jump in for a second. For people who have had prepared remarks, if you haven't submitted them, if you would, I think it's hard to keep track, if you will, of all of the comments, and so having those submitted would be very helpful. I also apologize to the committee in the sense that we had talked at the last meeting about a 3-minute limit, and we've I let the first few go and then failed to speak up. So if we can try to be brief because we got to be out of here.
As long as we have the time.
Yes. Thank you.
I will be brief.
Thank you.
Yep. My name is Kate Galambos. I have a question and 2 quick comments. My question is in regard to a detail that was in the economic development booklet where it said that 13%, I believe, of Branford's tax base is comprised of commercial and industrial. Is that correct? 13%.
Yeah.
And I know that there are many factors that would be used to compare, but I just would like to know, how does that position Branford in terms of maybe comparing to another town of a similar size? Does 13% make sense for our town, for the tax base to be commercial and industrial? In other words, are we satisfied with that, or are we looking to change that? Does that make sense for our town? So that's a question that I have.
So just really quick on behalf of the committee, if you have the opportunity to go back and look at booklet number 2, on page 13 of that booklet is a chart which shows all 169 municipalities in Connecticut in terms of their percent business tax base. This one here reports Branford, it's a different grand list year, reports Branford at 14% rather than 13%, and Branford was ranked 57 of the 169 municipalities. So that puts us approximately in the top third, if you will. There's really no true measure of exactly how much business tax base a community should have. The community which is number 1 here, I believe, is one of our urban areas where they tax business different than residential, which is somewhat unfair and skews the numbers. So I think our aspiration should be, what do we think works best for Branford, rather than having a specific number. And the higher the number, the better it might be for our tax situation, but it may have other implications as well.
So we would look at size, population, age range, all of those things. So it might be worthwhile really looking at that to say, does our zoning actually match, what makes sense for our town in terms of taxes and income? The second thing I just wanted to mention was on the 830 and the affordable housing. It's perplexing to me because I think we probably have more than 2% of affordable housing. I don't know if anybody here has been down Briarwood Road to see what's going on back in there in town. There's a lot of folks living in sub-optimal housing in Branford. Whether they're not being counted, I'm not sure, but I would support anything that the town can do to provide affordable housing for people to live in Branford. The third thing I wanted to say, and I would like to mention what this gentleman said. It's amazing to me that he spoke that way, because I have lived in a number of different towns in this country, which is the reason why I got involved in Branford's planning, because I've seen what's happened to other lovely towns that I've lived in where development came. And I actually did live in a town, Santa Cruz, California, that did close the downtown to traffic, and it turned into a pedestrian-only downtown area, and this was back in the 70s or so. And the town went from being a sleepy little town to becoming a major hub that people from all over the country went to that town, because that downtown area was all pedestrian. There was stores, bookstores, restaurants, music, all kinds of things happening. It was definitely a happening place. So I think Branford has the potential to also make that happen. So I would say, for me, that I would hope that the POCD would maintain focus on the downtown and the waterfront, because of what's happened recently. We're already going in that direction. We have the new big condominiums, or whatever they are, apartments being built, and that everything else in development in the town should support the downtown being functional and being successful. And that includes 56 and 53. Thank you.
Thank you. I think.
Anyone else?
Mr. Chairman, we're going to be. Yep.
Go ahead.
Hi, Michael Pascasilla. I saw something in natural resources and water quality, and I'm not sure if I could bring it up. I don't know the rules of this meeting, but I see something that from a local public health perspective, I just feel the need to bring up. So can I talk now, or do you need in writing? What are your rules?
Sure.
I think be brief, sure.
Yeah, I could keep it very brief. So Long Island Sound, we've really done a lot locally, working with Yale University and some other universities to improve the quality of Long Island Sound. We've done DNA tracking, looking for sources of pollution. We've really cleaned up our water, and we are reaping the benefits of it. We have multi-million-dollar shellfish beds. New markets are popping up, seaweed and kelp. And so when I look under, I think it's page 3, looking at the promotion of the pump out boat and more stringent water qualities, I think we really want to maintain what we have and improve it. And so I would recommend promoting that program. To date, it's kept 300,000 gallons of sewage out of water. Each year, it's between 20 to 25,000 gallons of sewage out of the water. We have lots of boats with heads. It's concentrated sewage, and just one boat could cause illness from people eating raw shellfish or even in our beaches. And so I really think we need to keep up the effort because the water quality shows that when I look at water quality now compared to years ago, the water is cleaner, and we want to keep that effort going. Also, from an economic development, why we live here is because of Long Island Sound. It's our greatest resource, and so I'm just going to urge that maybe and I'd be more than happy to work with anyone on language. I do see it says it's too detailed. I would agree. Maybe it needs to be a little makeup. Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I think unless the committee has anything else, I think we're close to the desired adjournment time, so we can clear the room up by the next speaker at 6:30. There's 2 other things I'd like to bring up.
Bill, did you have something?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I had a reaction to something Peter Henschel said, which was he focused on shoreline communities, and people may have a perhaps inappropriately limited sense of what constitutes shoreline here in Branford. People paid attention to the coastal resiliency study. They'll know that neighborhoods that on the map look like they're well inland actually are severely impacted by flooding from water that comes up the river. So
Sure.
we're talking about areas near the center of town.
Yes. Thank you for that.
I have a comment.
Go ahead, Marcy. Yep.
When they were talking about the percentage of, what's the right percentage of retail in town, I immediately went to, aside from the fact that our low cost and affordable housing doesn't jive, if we get up to that 10% of affordable by the state mandate, that's going to come at a cost to the town to support education and so forth. And so I think that those 2 things want to be balanced with whatever that right 13-14% number is. And then when the last person spoke about our greatest resource in coastal rising, maybe our focus should be less on developing around exit 53 that doesn't have a 4-way interchange, but maybe more on how do you integrate some new emerging tourist markets, marine markets, and what's the interplay of that? Do you use the Tilcon or get rights to use that Tilcon, the distribution around bringing the shellfish to the highway as opposed to, people coming to get to retail from the highway. So.
Mr. Chairman, as you may recall, we had initiated an online survey, if you will. The survey participation peaked around Christmas, New Year's, or whatever. There was a recent article in a newspaper. There's a recent spike in activity, but it's fairly modest at this point in time. There's 258 people that are responses that have been received. My suggestion would be that we take another shot, if you will, at invigorating the Facebook, Twitter, and other ways to do this. And I would propose we keep this open through our next meeting, which would be February 7th. Our next meeting is February 7th. That's a listening session on infrastructure topics, which includes things like community facilities, vehicular transportation, bikes, pedestrian, transit, and our utility infrastructure. Those booklets should be available at Town Hall, posted on the town website in about a week, roughly a week in advance of the meeting. And then at that time too, we talked about the possibility of a second meeting in February. We'll make a decision then on that.
Glenn, do you have a goal for the number of surveys that you'd like to have?
I would like every household in Branford to participate. But I recognize that that's not likely to happen. So I think the challenge can be, in this day and age, our normal vehicles, if you will, to get people to participate. People's attention has become spread out among various media sources. So being on community TV is going to help us. Facebook, Twitter, newspapers, press releases, everything else. So we're just going to continue to hope that we get a response.
And the surveys on the town website, people can get to it by going to our...
I think it's right there on the front page.
Front page, lower left.
Okay.
Go to the left.
Great.
And just finally, there is a telephone survey also, which is planned later in the process, so we'll be able to supplement with that.
Thank you.
Could I make a suggestion regarding the survey, which is that, mea culpa, I've been intending to set out emails to people in my communication network, calling it to their attention and asking them to do it. I suspect everybody on the commission has somewhat overlapping but different networks, and people in the audience here tonight could also do that. So if we do sort of a grassroots effort to get people activated, it may have an effect.
I would appreciate whatever we can do to get responses. I think that'd be great. Very helpful for us.
Great, thanks. Okay.
Motion to adjourn.
We have a motion to adjourn.
Move we adjourn.
Second. Thank you.
The preceding program was brought to you through the support of the Town of Branford. Watch town meetings or other videos on demand at BranfordTV.org.